Jason Nichols, lecturer at the University of Maryland, and Erin Elmore. She's a former RNC deputy press secretary. Thank you both for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Good morning.
Thanks, Heather.
So, Erin, I will start with you. Communist or socialist?
Certainly not a Democrat, that's for sure. All signs truly do point to way further left than socialism. If you look back to his college years, he was in socialist and Marxist organizations. Then in the 70s, he founded an organization that said, hey, let's outlaw private utilities. Let's make our banks nationalized. Then he founded another organization when he was living in Vermont, also a Marxist organization, saying, hey, we support Russia. We support the Sandinista organizations in Nicaragua. Also, we've even heard the things he's saying lately. It's almost like Marie Antoinette let them eat cake in Venezuela. Truthfully, it's terrifying, and anyone that considers themselves a Democrat should really take a further look at this, because their platform is being completely used by someone that doesn't understand or respect their value system.
Let me get Jason in here. Jason, what do you think? I mean, should we be shocked by some of these things that he's had to say?
Well, I think, first of all, if we're going to talk about things that people said 30 or 40 years ago, you know, there are many things that President Trump said 30 or 40 years ago. President Trump was probably, I believe he was a Democrat 30 or 40 years ago. So I think, you know, the things that he may have said in, you know, the 1980s aren't things that he advocates for today. I think what he advocates for today are, you know, social welfare programs and expansion of the welfare state. And that is in line with many of the other Democrats. So I don't think that this is something that we should even really take seriously. These are things that he said 4 decades ago. We can point to things that President Trump said a decade ago.
Well, he never said anything about supporting communism, though.
Are we talking about
I'm talking
Bernie
about
Sanders?
President Trump. President Trump never said anything about, you know, supporting communism.
Not, but he has said things about African Americans. He said things about.
But that's not what we're talking about.
And perhaps staying on task.
I appreciate the effort to spin it. I do appreciate that.
No,
but
there's no spin there.
That's a big spin. That is a big spin.
That's not a spin.
Not what we're talking
that's
about,
saying
though.
30 years ago, people's opinions change over time.
Okay, all right, I'll give you that.
They seem to be the same opinions, Heather, truthfully.
Well, I want to listen to this thought as well, Jason. I'll get you to respond to this. What he had to say about Castro transforming society.
Everybody was totally convinced that Castro was the worst guy in the world, that all the Cuban people were going to rise up in rebellion against Fidel Castro. They had forgot that he educated the kids, gave them health care, totally transformed the society. Marxist?
Sure. On occasion.
Daniel Ortega was elected president of Nicaragua in an election. Why don't we use the phrase Daniel Ortega, democratically elected president of Nicaragua?
Now, here's my point, Jason, with this. In 1985, Sanders traveled to New York City to meet with Ortega, and this was just after he had imposed this state of emergency there in Nicaragua, including shuttering the opposition newspapers and magazines. And we hear so much about President Trump and his war on the media, and then you have, you know, Bernie Sanders out there saying that he was in favor of this, basically.
Well, yeah, again, I think, you know, when you look at it, this is 1985. Many of the people who are watching this program right now weren't alive in 1985. And I would also say that when we look at the Contras versus the Sandinistas, the Contras were far more brutal. They killed far more people, and they trafficked drugs into our country. So I can understand why Bernie Sanders would say the Sandinistas were more progressive than the Contras. Now, were they good? Were they perfect? Absolutely not. And I don't think that's what he advocates for today.
Erin, final word.
Well, let's not point to the lesser of two evils to say one is righteous. However, having said that, let's look at what he said just last week about the crisis in Venezuela. His opinions have not changed. They've actually worsened.
All right. Thank you both for joining us, Jason and Erin. We have a long campaign to go, so we'll see what else he has to say.
Absolutely. Thank you, Heather.
We'll be right back.